You know, for decades, the Middle East had this tense but weirdly stable set of rules. It was all about deterrence, right? A kind of violent balance that kept the big players from going straight for each other's throats. Well, that shield just shattered. And what we're going to do today is dive into how that collapse has created a totally new and frankly terrifying reality where the old playbook, it's been tossed right out the window.
And that really brings us to the core question here. What actually happens when a 40-year-old strategy, the one thing that kept the lid on a regional catastrophe, just fails? What comes next? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is a shockingly fast and terrifying escalation.
And here's your answer, right up front. By June of 2025, that whole shadow war thing, it's over. We're talking about 10 days where Israel and Iran are hitting each other's territory directly, state on state. This is the exact scenario that for 4 decades, both sides did everything they could to avoid. So how on earth do we get here?
Okay, so to really get a grip on this explosion, we have to look at the fuse that was lit. The old way of doing things you see on the left, it was basically a regional Cold War. Yeah, it was brutal, but it was fought through proxies, and it had rules, you know? It was predictable. But the new reality, it's direct strikes. It's open, kinetic escalation. It is dangerously volatile because that buffer, it's just gone.
All right, let's start by digging into Iran's playbook. For decades, Tehran had perfected this very specific way of projecting power. It wasn't about having a giant conventional army. No, it was all about building this incredible network of allies and proxies, what they called the axis of resistance. The whole idea, the core concept, was something called forward defense. So by bankrolling, training, and arming groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, all these militias in Syria and Iraq, Iran could fight its enemies. We're talking mainly Israel and the US, way over there, far from its own borders. It was a shield, a buffer zone, built entirely out of proxies.
And if you break that playbook down, it looks something like this. Step 1, the absolute #1 goal above all else, regime survival. Everything else comes second. And to survive, they absolutely had to avoid a direct war they knew they probably couldn't win conventionally. So, step 3, they created that strategic depth using their proxies. And step 4, this is crucial, they built up their own missiles, their own drones, their own nuclear program, all to give them a fighting chance if that buffer ever failed. I mean, it was a risky strategy, but from their perspective, it was totally rational.
But then, starting in late 2023, this whole carefully built strategy just starts to unravel. And I mean, at breathtaking speed. The irony is, the very tools they designed to prevent a direct war are exactly what ended up sparking one.
And just look at this timeline. You can see how fast the dominoes fell. It kicks off in October 2023. The Gaza war begins, and that triggers the arena unification idea, pulling in the entire axis of resistance. Flash forward just 6 months to April 2024, and boom, Iran and Israel are firing missiles directly at each other, for the very first time. By October, it happens again, but this time it's a much bigger attack from Iran. Then the knockout blow. In December, their key state ally, Bashar al-Assad in Syria, his regime falls. Suddenly that land bridge, that strategic buffer, is gone. By the time we hit June 2025, there's literally nothing left holding the line. A direct war is inevitable. You know, a Spanish strategic analysis really nailed it with this quote. It says, "Everything they planned to happen has not happened. Everything they did not want to happen is happening." I mean, think about that. The very strategy designed to keep war far away had dragged it right onto Iran's doorstep. It was a complete, catastrophic failure of their entire deterrence model.
So this massive failure leads directly to 10 days of open war in June of 2025. This was it, the moment the whole region had been dreading for decades.
So what did this war actually look like? Well, for 10 straight days, Israel was hitting targets deep inside Iran. And they weren't just any targets. They were going after the crown jewels, nuclear sites, missile factories, key energy facilities. Iran, for its part, fired back with a whole barrage of missiles and drones. But honestly, most of them were knocked out of the sky by a pretty sophisticated, multi-layer defense. Things got really tense when the US got involved, conducting its own strikes. Iran retaliated against the US base in Qatar. Finally, on June 24th, a very, very fragile ceasefire went into effect.
But the cost for Iran, it was steep. We're talking over 1,000 casualties. But it's not just the number. The really big deal was who was on that list. This wasn't just soldiers. We're talking senior politicians, top military commanders, and the actual scientists behind their weapons programs. It was a crippling blow to their entire strategic leadership. And what about their nuclear program? The damage was immense. And hey, don't take my word for it. This quote is from the Director General of the IAEA, the world's top atomic watchdog. He said, "No one is in a position to have fully assessed the underground damage at Fordo, but very significant damage is expected to have occurred." That's a huge deal coming from him.
Okay, so the shooting stops. Now what? That 10-day war might seem short, but it completely redrew the geopolitical map of the Middle East. Everything changed.
So the first, most obvious consequence? Iran's shield, that axis of resistance, is shattered. Hamas and Hezbollah, its two star players, were already battered from earlier conflicts. And now, with Assad gone in Syria, that whole network that used to project Iranian power across the region, well, it's just a shadow of what it used to be.
And what happens when a power structure like that collapses? You get a massive power vacuum. The era of those sort of frozen, predictable conflicts, over. It's been replaced by straight-up chaos. Syria is now completely fragmented. You've got Turkey carving out its own buffer zone in the north, you've got hardline groups like HTS gaining influence in Damascus, and all of a sudden, other major players like Saudi Arabia realize they can't just sit back and watch anymore. They're forced to get more directly involved.
Which brings us to where we are now in 2026. The shooting war might be over, but don't let that fool you. The region is anything but stable. In fact, the whole place is living on a knife's edge. There's a great term for this new era from the analysts at Special Eurasia. They call it a precarious armed peace, and that's exactly what it is. It's a peace that's built on shaky deals. It's totally volatile, and it feels like it could shatter at any second. There are a lot of conditions. So if you look at the top risks for 2026, you can see how much things have changed. The number one geopolitical risk isn't proxy wars anymore. It's a full-blown Iranian nuclear breakout. That's a whole new level of danger. And right behind that, you've got the very real threat of a resurgent Islamic State, feeding on the chaos in Syria, the total collapse of the Syrian state, and a massive governance void in Gaza. It's a laundry list of worst-case scenarios.
So when we drill down, these are the specific threats that are keeping intelligence analysts up at night. First, a new kind of Islamic State, more mobile, decentralized, harder to pin down. Second, Iran's frantic race to rebuild its missile production. Third, the spread of new tech, like AI-enhanced drone swarms for attacking ships. And finally, that constant, nagging risk that the Israel-Lebanon border, which is never truly quiet, could just explode all over again.
But out of all of that, this right here is the single most dangerous development. Because with its proxy shield broken and its conventional deterrence in tatters, intelligence now suggests Iran has decided to go for the ultimate insurance policy. They've ramped up uranium enrichment to 90%. Let's be crystal clear, that is weapons grade. The message they're sending couldn't be any louder. Attack us again, and next time, we'll have a nuclear bomb. So that leaves us with one final, pretty chilling question. In this new era, with the old rules gone and Iran pushed into a nuclear corner, what is the ultimate danger we're all facing? Well, the answer from geopolitical analysts is a stark one. They're saying a second, direct conflict between Israel and Iran isn't just possible, it's now considered highly probable. So that 10-day war in 2025, it's starting to look less like the war and more like just phase one. The shattered shield didn't create peace. All it did was leave the entire region exposed to a future that is infinitely more dangerous than the past.